right now, like literally as we speak, there are these massive artificial intelligence data centers, right?
Mhm.
And they're drawing so much physical electricity from the grid that they are threatening to brown out entire residential
Oh,
neighborhoods.
yeah. It is a very real, very physical problem right now.
It is wild. And so, on the exact same day that Congress was actively panicking about this impending energy crisis, they also proposed this legislative pilot program to use that very same artificial intelligence to audit your tax return.
Right. Which is just this crazy juxtaposition.
It really is. So today, we are looking at this intense, honestly, kind of messy collision of advanced code, physical infrastructure, and the United States Congress. So welcome to this deep dive for Congress in context. We're looking at a massive stack of source material from late June 2026, specifically June 29th.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge from that single day on the Hill. So grab a chair. You are officially at the political strategy table with us today.
It's a really remarkable day to analyze because when you look at all the sources, the floor debates, the finalized votes, the committee actions, all overlapping in this 24-hour window, a very distinct dual reality emerges.
Yeah, dual reality is a great way to put it.
Yeah, I would really frame the core theme of this deep dive as basically modernizing the system versus debating the doctrine.
Modernizing the system versus debating the doctrine. I mean, that captures the tension perfectly because when you actually read these sources, you realize that half the time, lawmakers are acting like, I don't know, pragmatic engineers, just quietly and efficiently upgrading the machinery of the country.
Precisely. You see this highly efficient, totally bipartisan consensus on fixing digital safety regulations, patching vulnerabilities in the electrical grid, recovering stolen pandemic funds.
Right.
It's very methodical work.
Right, just getting the job done.
Exactly. But then, happening literally on the exact same day, in the exact same room, you have these deeply fractured ideological battles that question the very nature of American foreign policy, military deployment, and like how we even interpret our own domestic history.
It is such a striking split screen.
It really is.
And navigating that split screen is our mission today. But real quick, before we jump into the deep end of the legislative pool here, just a quick housekeeping note. Congress in Context is a completely independent, ad-free civic education project.
Yeah.
We don't have corporate sponsors pulling the strings, which means we rely entirely on you. So if you value this kind of unbiased, detailed breakdown of what is actually happening in your government, check out the Buy Me a Coffee link in your app's show notes. It really helps support the production infrastructure that keeps us going.
Yeah, it's really the only way we can keep this information accessible and, free from outside influence.
Absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the legislative highlights, like the bills that actually crossed the finish line on the House floor.
The stuff that passed.
Right. Because this proves that despite the gridlock and the partisan shouting matches we constantly see on the news, Congress is, in fact, moving significant bipartisan legislation.
Yeah.
The first one in our stack is H.R. 7757, the KIDS Act, which stands for the Kids Internet and Digital Safety Act.
And this is really a foundational piece of legislation for the digital age. And you can see how seriously lawmakers are taking it just by looking at the vote margin. It passed with 267 votes in favor to 117 against.
Yeah, that's a solid margin. Now, when I first read the summary, my initial thought was, okay, this is basically putting a digital child-proof lock on the internet's front door. But looking closer at the mechanics, that analogy doesn't really hold up, does it?
Not really, no.
It's not about locking kids out. It's about changing how the environment reacts to them once they are inside. I mean, the core tenets are about empowering parents, sure, but the massive shift is the outright ban on targeted advertising to kids and teens.
That is the critical distinction right there. Banning targeted ads for kids isn't a firewall. It's more like, it's like blinding the algorithm.
Blinding the algorithm. Okay, break down how that actually works in practice, because I think a lot of people don't realize how aggressive the current baseline is right now.
So, under the current ecosystem, if a 13-year-old is browsing the internet, scrolling through social media, watching videos, whatever, the platforms are harvesting an immense amount of behavioral data.
Like everything they click on.
Everything. They track how long the child lingers on a specific video, what links they click, what search terms they use, and even their physical location in real time.
Wow.
And the algorithm then builds this highly sophisticated psychological profile of that child. It uses that profile to serve targeted advertisements designed to exploit their specific vulnerabilities, interests, or insecurities. And the whole goal is just to maximize engagement and ultimately revenue.
So, like, if a kid has been looking at a bunch of fitness videos, the algorithm might start targeting them with ads for, I don't know, unregulated supplements or extreme diet programs because it knows that's where their attention is currently focused.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
weaponizes their own attention. The Kids Act fundamentally disrupts that mechanism. By banning targeted advertising to minors, it says to big tech, you can no longer use a child's behavioral history to decide which ad to show them.
So they can't track them to sell to them.
Right. Now, you can still show them an advertisement, perhaps a contextual ad, based strictly on the content they're currently viewing, like a toy commercial playing before a cartoon.
Mm.
But you cannot weaponize their own digital footprint against them. You are legally blinding the algorithm to their personal data.
Man, that is a massive paradigm shift for an industry whose entire business model relies on, hyper-personalization. Now, what really stands out in the source documents is the political maneuvering that actually got this passed.
Oh, the coalition building was fascinating.
Right. You had this group of representatives, Guthrie, Pallone, Bilirakis, Castor, and Lee, from completely different sides of the political spectrum coming together. And the key to unlocking this compromise seems to be how they handled the whole issue of state preemption.
Yeah, state preemption is often the graveyard of federal tech legislation.
How so?
Well, usually when the federal government passes a standard, it preempts or overrides any state laws on the exact same subject. Tech companies love federal preemption because it means they only have to comply with one national rule rather than a patchwork of 50 different state laws.
Which makes sense from a compliance standpoint.
Sure, but consumer advocates absolutely hate it if the federal standard is too weak because it prevents aggressive states from protecting their citizens more robustly.
Oh, I see. So if, like, California or New York wants to pass a hyper-strict data privacy law for kids, a weak federal law with a preemption clause would actually make California kids less safe by wiping out their state protections.
Precisely. It sets a ceiling instead of a floor. But the genius of the Kids Act's compromise is that it explicitly does not preempt states from taking further action.
Oh, that's huge.
It is. It sets a strong federal baseline, a minimum standard of digital safety that applies to every child in the country, whether they live in Idaho or New Jersey. But it leaves the door wide open for individual states to build upon that foundation.
So it's a floor, not a ceiling.
Exactly. It's a classic example of lawmakers realizing that they cannot let the perfect become the enemy of the good. They couldn't agree on a massive, all-encompassing, preemptive tech regulation, so they found a powerful, targeted baseline they could agree on, and they pushed it through.
That tension between federal oversight and state-level reality is something we're going to see a lot of today, I think. But before we get to that, let's move from the digital world into something intensely physical. Let's look at H.R. 7128, the TRIA Program Reauthorization Act of 2026.
The RIA, yes.
The vote count on this was 373 to 15. I mean, in today's political climate, getting 373 members of the House to agree on what day of the week it is feels like a miracle, let alone a major piece of financial legislation.
Well, the overwhelming consensus exists because the stakes here are purely existential for the American commercial real estate market. TRIA stands for the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. It was originally passed back in 2002 in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th attacks.
Okay, so why was it necessary? Like, what was happening in the market in 2002 that forced the federal government to just step in?
After 9/11, private insurance companies realized they could not accurately model or price the risk of massive, catastrophic terrorist attacks.
The scale was just too big.
The potential losses were astronomical. So they just stopped offering terrorism coverage entirely. And without that coverage, the commercial real estate market ground to an absolute halt.
Wait, really? It just stopped?
Completely. Because if you are a developer trying to build a high-rise office building in Chicago or a new shopping mall in Atlanta, you need a multi-million-dollar loan from a bank. And the bank will not give you that loan unless the building is insured against all major perils, including terrorism.
Right, the bank wants its investment protected.
Exactly. So when the private insurers pulled out, the lending stopped, and construction halted across the country.
So TRIA was created to essentially have the federal government act as the ultimate backstop. The government says to the private insurers, you write the policies, and if a catastrophic attack happens that exceeds a certain massive dollar amount, the federal taxpayer will step in and cover the rest so you don't go bankrupt.
That is the exact mechanism. It's a public-private risk-sharing program. And this new bill, H.R. 7128, extends that vital program all the way through 2034. But it doesn't just rubber stamp the old law. It actually modernizes the mechanics to reflect current economic reality.
Right, because the sources highlight a major change to the certification threshold. It used to be $5 million, dollars, and now this bill bumps it up to $25 million. Dollars. What does that actually mean in plain English?
The certification threshold is essentially the trigger point. Under the old rules, if an event occurred and caused $5 million in property and casualty damage, the Secretary of the Treasury could officially certify it as an act of terrorism, which then triggered the federal insurance backstop.
Okay.
By raising that threshold to $25 million, Congress is shifting more of the burden back onto the private insurance market for those smaller scale events.
I suppose that makes sense. I mean, $5 million in commercial real estate damage today is a vastly different scale than it was in 2002, just due to inflation and the cost of building materials.
Exactly. Congress is basically saying that the private sector is now robust enough to absorb a $20 million loss without needing a federal bailout. The government is reserving its backstop role only for truly massive catastrophic events. Furthermore, the bill adds a crucial transparency measure.
Which is what?
It requires the Treasury to publish a formal notice in the Federal Register 30 days before certifying an event as terrorism-related.
Wait, why a 30-day notice? If an attack happens, wouldn't they want to certify it immediately to release the funds and help people?
You would think so, but it's about market stability. A certification triggers massive financial shifts, payouts, and liability changes across the entire global insurance industry.
Oh, it causes a ripple effect.
A massive one.
Hmm.
By providing a 30-day notice, the Treasury gives the commercial real estate and reinsurance markets time to brace themselves, run their models, prepare liquidity, and understand exactly how the federal intervention is going to unfold. It prevents panic.
And the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, ran the numbers on this reauthorization and came out with a really fascinating estimate.
They estimate that extending this program through 2034 will actually reduce the federal deficit by more than $1 billion.
Okay, stop right there. How does a program where the federal government promises to potentially pay out billions of dollars in disaster relief actually reduce the deficit? That sounds like math that doesn't work.
It sounds counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it comes down to the mechanics of recoupment.
Recoupment.
Right. If the federal backstop is triggered, the government pays out the claims to stabilize the economy. But the law requires the government to recoup those outlays over time by levying surcharges on all commercial property and casualty insurance policyholders in the years following the event.
Oh, so they basically tax the industry to get the money back later.
Yes. The CBO analyzes the statistical probability of an attack occurring, balances it against the mandatory recoupment surcharges and the premium fees collected, and determines that over the 10-year window, the program will take in more money than it is statistically projected to pay out.
So Congress gets to stabilize a multi-trillion-dollar real estate market, prevent construction from grinding to a halt, and simultaneously book a $1 billion deficit reduction.
That's right.
Well, no wonder it passed 373 to 50.
It is the rare piece of legislation that achieves its economic goals while satisfying both market advocates and fiscal hawks at the same time.
Speaking of fiscal hawks, let's talk about protecting taxpayer dollars from outright theft. Our next bill is H.R. 8873, the Recover COVID Unemployment Fraud in Banks Act.
This is a big one.
Yeah, and this bill sailed through the Ways and Means Committee with a unanimous 41-0 vote before hitting the House floor. Now, we all know that the pandemic-era unemployment programs, the PUA, the PPP loans, they were targeted by massive, unprecedented levels of fraud. Both domestic criminals and international syndicates basically looted the system.
The scale of the fraud was staggering, often estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars. But what makes H.R. 8873 unique is that it is highly targeted.
It's not a broad sweep.
Exactly. It is not trying to boil the ocean. It is going after a very specific pool of stolen money. The bill creates a national recovery coordinator and a dedicated task force whose sole mission is to claw back funds that are just sitting untouched on prepaid debit cards, or funds that have been escheated to state unclaimed property administrators.
Okay, I have to stop you there. Escheated. That is one of those legal terms that just completely glazes over the eyes of anyone outside a law firm. I need a translation from legalese to plain English here. What does escheatment actually mean in the context of a stolen unemployment check?
It's dense, I know. But
Okay.
basically, escheatment is the legal mechanism by which dormant or abandoned financial assets get transferred to the state government.
Okay, walk me through an example.
Sure. Imagine a fraudster sitting in another country. They manage to steal the identity of a citizen in Ohio, file a fraudulent unemployment claim, and direct the government to load the money onto a prepaid debit card. The
Yeah.
card gets loaded with say $10,000.
Mm.
But then something happens. Maybe the fraudster loses access to the account. Maybe the bank flags it for suspicious activity and freezes it before the money can be withdrawn. Or maybe the fraudster just gets spooked and walks away.
So the money is just sitting there in digital limbo.
Exactly. It's just sitting there. After a certain period of inactivity, usually 3 to 5 years, depending on the state law, that bank account is considered dormant. And the bank cannot just keep the money. By law, they must transfer it or escheat it to the state's unclaimed property division. The state holds it, theoretically waiting for the rightful owner to claim it.
But the rightful owner in this case is the federal taxpayer because it's stolen federal pandemic relief money.
Precisely. And right now, there are billions of dollars of stolen federal money sitting in state-level unclaimed property accounts.
Billions.
Yes. So this task force is designed to cut through the jurisdictional red tape, identify those escheated funds, and pull them directly back into the federal treasury.
That makes total sense. I mean, it's low-hanging fruit. The money isn't spent. It's just trapped in bureaucratic amber.
Exactly.
But there is another major provision in this bill that I kind of want to push back on. H.R. 8873 extends the statute of limitations for prosecuting pandemic unemployment fraud from 3 years to 10 years.
And that is arguably the most consequential part of the legislation for the justice system.
But wait a minute. Extending a statute of limitations a full decade after the fact, doesn't that just mean the government failed to do its job in the first 3 years, and now they are basically moving the goalposts so they don't look incompetent? I mean, if you couldn't catch the fraudster between 2020 and 2023, why should we believe you're going to catch them in 2030?
That is a very valid critique of how government resources are deployed. However, the counter-argument, and the reason this actually passed unanimously in committee, is based on the sheer complexity of international cybercrime.
Okay, so it's not just a guy in his basement.
No, we are not just talking about a guy down the street who claimed an extra week of benefits. We are talking about sophisticated, state-sponsored hacking syndicates in North Korea, Russia, and China who used automated bots to file millions of claims simultaneously.
They just overwhelm the system with volume.
Exactly. And tracking that money requires untangling a massive web of shell companies, cryptocurrency tumblers, and international wire transfers. That kind of forensic accounting takes years just to build a prosecutable case.
So it's a time issue.
Right. If the statute of limitations remained at 3 years, thousands of international cybercriminals would get away with stealing American tax dollars simply because the clock ran out while the FBI was still waiting on, say, a subpoena from a foreign bank.
Oh, wow.
By extending the window to a decade, Congress is giving federal prosecutors the runway they need to actually dismantle the complex rings, not just catch the low-level mules.
It's sending a very clear message. The clock hasn't run out, and the federal government has a very long memory.
Yes, they do.
Now, speaking of complex threats and international adversaries, that same tension between federal oversight and localized vulnerability is exactly what is paralyzing our energy grid right now. Let's look at the grid security block. Congress pushed through a massive bundle of bills on the exact same day, H.R. 725,000, 72558, 7276, and 7305, and all of these are aimed at securing American energy infrastructure.
It represents a really comprehensive, multi-layered approach to a terrifying vulnerability. For example, H.R. 7305 reauthorizes the Department of Energy's Cyber Resilience Program and establishes the Energy Threat Analysis Center, or ETAC.
ETAC, okay.
And the core goal here is facilitating real-time, classified and unclassified information sharing between the federal intelligence apparatus and private energy sector operators.
Right, because if a utility in Texas is seeing a specific type of malware probing its firewalls, the federal government needs to know instantly so they can warn utilities in Maine and Oregon. But then you look at H.R. 7266, the Rural and Municipal Utilities Cybersecurity Act. This bill authorizes $250 million for rural and municipal utilities to upgrade their digital defenses. And I have to play devil's advocate here again. Are we really just throwing $250 million at tiny rural utilities without a centralized federal standard? I mean, isn't a highly decentralized grid actually harder for adversaries to hack because it's so fragmented? Like, if I want to take down the internet, taking down one server doesn't work. Doesn't that same logic apply to the power grid?
That is a very common assumption. It feels intuitive that a decentralized, fragmented system is harder to conquer. But the physical reality of the American power grid operates on entirely different principles.
How so?
Small, rural, or municipal utilities are not isolated islands of electricity. They own substations, transformers, and transmission lines that are deeply interconnected with the bulk power system. They are interwoven threads in a massive national tapestry.
So what happens if a thread gets pulled?
Well, that is the vulnerability. These
Yeah.
smaller entities often lack the resources, the dedicated IT security staff, or the capital to defend against a state-sponsored cyber actor. Imagine you are running a mid-sized municipal utility in rural Vermont.
Okay.
You have 3 IT guys, and their main job is making sure the billing software works.
Right, they aren't cyber warriors.
Exactly. But you are now expected to defend your network against Unit 600-398 of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. It is a completely asymmetrical war.
And the adversary obviously knows that.
Exactly. An adversary doesn't have to attack the most fortified central hub in New York or Washington, D.C. They just have to find the weakest link, that rural substation in Vermont with outdated firmware hack into it, and use that foothold to introduce malware that cascades failures across the broader interconnected network.
Wow. So funding the rural utilities isn't just a localized handout. It is actually about patching the backdoor vulnerabilities that threaten the entire national system.
Precisely. And that brings us to how they are enforcing standards, which actually addresses your concern about a lack of centralization. H.R. 725-7, the Secure Grid Act, requires states to include physical and cybersecurity for local distribution systems directly in their state energy security plans.
Oh, so there is strings attached to the money.
Yes, the federal government isn't just handing out money blindly. They're forcing states to create a unified, risk-mitigated defense strategy that trickles down to those municipal levels. It brings the decentralized pieces under a cohesive security umbrella.
It is fascinating to see how the physical realities of electricity sort of dictate the legislative strategy. Rounding out the legislative highlights on the floor, we have a quick but vital one regarding the healthcare system. H.R. 5347, the Healthcare Efficiency Through Flexibility Act.
Right. This bill amends the Medicare Shared Savings Program. It specifically creates a pilot program for digital quality measure reporting for accountable care organizations, or ACOs.
Okay, let's define an ACO for the listener, because accountable care organizations sounds like a generic corporate buzzword, but it actually represents a massive shift in how doctors get paid, right?
It does. It's a huge shift. Historically, healthcare in America operated on a fee-for-service model. A doctor gets paid for every test they run, every scan they order, every procedure they perform.
Which incentivizes volume over health.
Exactly. An ACO flips that model entirely. An ACO is a network of doctors, hospitals, and specialists who come together and share financial and medical responsibility for providing coordinated care to a group of Medicare patients. Under an ACO model, the providers get paid based on the health outcomes of the patients, not the volume of services.
So if they keep you healthy, they make more money.
Right. If they keep the patient healthy out of the emergency room and manage their chronic conditions efficiently, the ACO shares in the financial savings generated for Medicare.
So they are incentivized to actually keep you well. But to prove they are keeping you well, they have to report a massive amount of data back to the government.
And that is exactly where the friction lies. The administrative burden of reporting all these quality metrics, like blood pressure control rates, cancer screening percentages, diabetes management, is just overwhelming. Doctors spend hours staring at screens, filling out redundant forms, instead of actually looking at patients.
Which defeats the purpose of coordinated care.
Exactly. So H.R. 5347 is designed to streamline that process. By creating a pilot program for digital quality measure reporting, the goal is to allow electronic health record systems to automatically extract and transmit the necessary data, radically reducing the manual administrative burden. It is a technical fix, but it is absolutely vital for ensuring that doctors are treating patients, not doing data entry.
It's all about making the machinery run smoother. So let's take a step back and look at the landscape we've just covered here. We have looked at a series of bills where Congress successfully agreed. They achieved bipartisan wins on setting a backline for digital safety for kids, stabilizing the commercial real estate insurance market, aggressively recovering stolen pandemic funds, patching vulnerabilities in the rural power grid, and reducing data entry for doctors. By all accounts, the system is working.
It is working methodically, yes. But as we established at the beginning of our deep dive, there is a dual reality to the United States Congress.
Here we go.
Because on the exact same day that they were passing these pragmatic mechanical fixes, we saw fierce, deeply ideological debates happening on the House floor that questioned the very foundations of American policy.
The consensus sits right alongside profound philosophical divides. And nowhere was that divide more apparent than in the debate over HCon Res 108. Now, to you, our listeners, I want to be absolutely clear before we dive into this specific debate. We are going to present the arguments from all sides impartially. We take absolutely no stance on the politics, the morality, or the foreign policy implications here. Our job is simply to report what was argued in the congressional record so that you can understand the ideological forces shaping the government.
The dynamics surrounding this resolution were highly charged, to say the least. H-Con Res. 108 was a resolution directing the President of the United States, pursuant to the War Powers Resolution, to remove United States armed forces from hostilities in Lebanon within 7 days of the resolution's adoption.
Let's set the historical context here before we look at the specific arguments. The War Powers Resolution was passed in 1973, right in the waning days of the Vietnam War, overriding a veto by President Nixon. And the entire purpose of that 1973 law was to resolve a fundamental tension in the U.S. Constitution. Article 1 gives Congress the sole power to declare war, but Article 2 makes the president the commander-in-chief of the military.
Exactly. For decades, presidents have been deploying troops into armed conflicts without ever asking Congress for a formal declaration of war. The War Powers Resolution was Congress's attempt to claw back that authority.
Right.
It dictates that if the president introduces U.S. forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances, the president must notify Congress within 48 hours. And they must withdraw those troops within 60 days unless Congress explicitly authorizes them to stay.
So bringing a War Powers Resolution to the floor is essentially Congress pulling the emergency brake on the commander-in-chief. This debate over Lebanon brought out three entirely different lenses through which lawmakers view America's role in the world. Let's start with the opposition to the resolution, which was forcefully articulated by Representative Mast.
Representative Mast approached the issue primarily through the lens of geopolitics and literal interpretation. He argued vehemently against the resolution on the grounds that the United States is not, in fact, at war in Lebanon and has no ground troops engaged in offensive combat operations there.
He noted that the military personnel present in Lebanon are primarily Marines stationed there to protect the U.S. Embassy in Beirut.
Correct. And his argument extended beyond the definition of hostilities into regional strategy. He pointed out that bringing this resolution to the floor was dangerous because it undermined a very fragile, newly announced trilateral peace framework between Israel, Lebanon, and the United States.
So he viewed it as disruptive.
Very. In his view, attempting to force a U.S. withdrawal sends a signal of abandonment, emboldens Hezbollah, and drives a wedge between international allies purely for the sake of domestic political messaging.
Okay, that is the geopolitical stability argument. But on the other side of the aisle, you had the bill's sponsor, Representative Tlaib, presenting a vastly different perspective on what constitutes U.S. involvement and moral culpability. She didn't focus on troop placements. She focused on the supply chain of the conflict.
Right. Representative Tlaib centered her argument entirely on the humanitarian toll and the financial entanglement of the United States. She argued that while there may not be U.S. infantry battalions on the ground in Lebanon, the U.S. is deeply complicit in the hostilities.
Because of the funding.
Yes. She stated that 4,200 civilians have died from U.S.-funded bombs, arguing that the operational, intelligence, and targeting support provided by the U.S. military constitutes active involvement in the war.
The sources show she heavily cited international reports during her time on the floor.
She did. She cited reports from UNICEF detailing the daily, harrowing realities of children being killed or maimed in the crossfire. She also quoted specific Israeli leadership regarding their intentions and operations in the territory. Her core argument was a demand to end the use of American taxpayer dollars to fuel foreign wars and a blanket condemnation of indiscriminate bombings. It was an argument rooted in humanitarian urgency and fiscal morality.
And then, providing a third distinct angle to this debate was Representative Meeks. When you read his statements, he didn't necessarily align entirely with either Mast's geopolitical focus or Tlaib's humanitarian focus. He took an almost purely institutional approach.
He did. Representative Meeks focused on the constitutional architecture. He explicitly stated on the floor that he did not believe U.S. troops were currently engaged in combat hostilities on the ground in Lebanon. In that sense, he agreed with Representative Mast's assessment of the physical reality.
But despite believing troops weren't combat, he still supported the resolution.
Yes, and that is where the institutional argument comes in. He supported the resolution as a necessary and timely assertion of Congress's constitutional authority over matters of war and peace.
So it was about precedent.
Exactly. For Meeks, the debate wasn't just about Lebanon, it was about precedent. It was about firing a warning shot across the bow of the executive branch, reminding the president that the balance of power still exists, and preventing the administration from slowly dragging the United States into a broader regional conflict without seeking explicit prior congressional approval.
Man, three totally different lenses on the exact same resolution. The geopolitical alliance lens, the humanitarian and funding lens, and the constitutional balance of power lens. It is a perfect microcosm of the ideological reckoning happening in the House right now. They aren't just debating a bill, they are debating the very definition of American power.
And that profound reckoning extended beyond foreign policy into domestic history as well. Because during the morning hour debates on this same day, Representative McClellan gave a powerful speech marking the upcoming 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Morning hour debates are fascinating because they allow members to speak on virtually any topic they choose for up to 5 minutes, separate from the legislative calendar. It's a great barometer for what is on their minds. And McClellan really dug into the concept of the more perfect union, didn't she?
She did, and she refused to offer a sanitized, purely celebratory version of history. She framed the upcoming semi-quincentennial around the inherent agonizing contradictions of the nation's founding. She painted a vivid picture of the reality of 1776, highlighting that founders like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were writing profound, world-changing documents about liberty, equality, and unalienable rights, while simultaneously operating plantations and owning enslaved people.
Imagine the physical reality of that. Jefferson sitting in a room at Monticello drafting the words, "All men are created equal," while enslaved men and women were literally outside his window, legally considered his property, laboring to sustain his estate. It is a staggering cognitive dissonance that the country was built upon.
It is. And McClellan didn't just bring up that history as an academic exercise. She used it to draw a direct, unbroken line to modern policy debates. She connected historical methods of voter suppression like literacy tests, poll taxes, and the racial terror lynchings during Reconstruction to current, ongoing legislative battles over voting rights, access to the ballot box, and the dismantling of social safety nets.
Bringing the past right into the present.
Exactly. She argued that the struggle to resolve that initial contradiction is still the defining fight of American politics today.
She also pointed out a highly specific statistic about the current makeup of Congress to illustrate where that fight stands today.
Yes. She noted that the Congressional Black Caucus currently has a record 61 members. She positioned this caucus not just as a demographic milestone, but as a legislative bulwark against what she termed a historical backlash.
A backlash.
Yeah, she argued that every single time the nation moves closer to its founding ideals of true equality, whether during Reconstruction or the Civil Rights Movement, there is a concerted structural effort to roll back those gains. Her speech was a demand that a true 250th anniversary commemoration must reckon with the country's full, unvarnished history, rather than just throwing a parade.
From historical reckonings to present-day accountability, the ideological dynamics on the floor also included a massive, surprise procedural move by Representative Massey that day.
Oh, this was a major moment. This was a privileged resolution, which is a procedural tool that allows a member to force a vote on a matter that affects the safety, dignity, or integrity of the House itself, bypassing the usual committee delays.
And Massey used it to demand extreme transparency regarding the inner workings and the internal behavior of Congress itself.
He did.
Walk through the mechanics of what he was actually demanding, because it cuts right to the heart of institutional trust.
The resolution explicitly demands that the House Ethics Committee publicly release a consolidated, unredacted list within 60 days of all members of Congress, both current and former, who have used taxpayer funds to settle sexual harassment claims or workplace misconduct lawsuits.
That is a bombshell. Because for years, there's been this shadowy, bureaucratic process where members could quietly settle workplace claims using an opaque treasury fund, keeping their names out of the press and hiding their behavior from their constituents.
Exactly. Massey's resolution is an attempt to shatter that opacity. It forces the House to go on the record about its own moral compass. It's demanding that lawmakers face the same level of scrutiny and accountability that they routinely demand from private corporations or the executive branch.
When you pull back and look at the entirety of this floor action, it is breathtaking.
Yeah.
Whether we are talking about war powers in the Middle East, the unresolved contradictions of the Declaration of Independence, or forcing ethical transparency regarding taxpayer-funded hush money, these debates show a Congress wrestling intensely with its own identity, its authority, and its moral justification.
It is the raw, unfiltered machinery of democracy in action.
Okay, we have seen what passed on the floor, and we've analyzed the fierce debates. But floor votes are only the tip of the iceberg. To truly understand where Congress is headed, we have to look below the waterline. We have to look at the legislative pipeline, the bills currently circulating through committees that haven't necessarily hit the floor for a final vote yet, but show us exactly where Congress is at. We are going to do a deep dive into two massive areas of focus emerging from the committees right now. First, the modernization of Veterans Affairs.
When you analyze the source documents from the committee level, the sheer volume of VA-related bills introduced or marked up on this single day is staggering. It is a clear signal that the status quo of the Department of Veterans Affairs is considered completely unacceptable by lawmakers across the board.
It really is overwhelming to read. It seems like Congress has realized that the VA is this massive, incredibly complex bureaucracy that can't be fixed with one sweeping reform bill. So they're trying to fix it by attacking the problem from 10 different angles at once, tightening bolts and replacing gears all over the machine.
That is a very accurate assessment of their strategy. If we synthesize these dozens of bills, a comprehensive three-pronged strategy emerges from the committees: transparency in crisis, rapid disaster response, and highly specialized care and access.
Let's break those down, starting with the most urgent, transparency in crisis. How do you legislate transparency when dealing with the tragedy of veteran suicide?
We see the mechanism for this in H.R. 9018. Currently, the data flow regarding crises at VA facilities can be sluggish and opaque. This bill mandates a strict timeline. It requires the VA to officially notify Congress within exactly 7 days of a veteran's suicide or attempted suicide occurring at any VA facility.
Wow, 7 days.
But it doesn't stop at notification.
Yeah.
It mandates a comprehensive follow-up report within 60 days that must include highly specific demographic and systemic data.
What kind of data are they demanding?
They want to know the veteran's complete insurance profile. Were they relying on TRICARE, Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance? They want data on the veteran's housing status to track the correlation between homelessness and suicide. They want the veteran's specific disability rating.
They want the full picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're basically demanding real-time, granular data to understand the systemic failures, the specific vulnerabilities, and the intersecting crises that lead to these tragedies on VA grounds. You cannot engineer a systemic solution if you don't have accurate data on where and why the system is failing.
Right. The second prong you mentioned was rapid disaster response. And this is fascinating because it shows how environmental crises interact with bureaucratic processes. Let's look at H.R. 6588, the PROVIDE Act.
The PROVIDE Act addresses a massive blind spot in the current claims process. Imagine a veteran living in a coastal community in Florida who just submitted a complex disability claim requiring multiple medical reviews and extensive paperwork. Then, a Category 5 hurricane hits. Their home is flooded, their records are destroyed, the local post office is gone, and their life is entirely upended.
Under the normal rules, what happens to their claim?
Under standard bureaucratic procedures, if they miss a deadline to submit supplemental evidence because their town is underwater, their claim could be denied or severely delayed. There is currently no prioritized, standardized pipeline for processing claims for veterans whose lives are shattered by major disasters.
That's awful.
It is. The PROVIDE Act forces the VA to build that pipeline. It mandates the expedition of disability claims, the relaxation of certain strict evidence requirements, and the extension of deadlines for veterans living in federally declared disaster zones. It legally recognizes that a bureaucratic delay during a natural disaster can be financially and medically devastating.
It's building elasticity into a normally rigid system. The third prong of this VA modernization push is specialized care and access. There are quite a few bills here addressing very specific medical and financial realities.
There are. For instance, H.R. 6835 focuses on the physical realities of severe injuries. It mandates annual preventative health evaluations specifically tailored for veterans living with spinal cord injuries or disorders. It also pushes the VA to provide greater access to advanced assistive technologies, explicitly mentioning spinal cord neuromodulation therapies.
What is spinal neuromodulation?
It is an advanced medical technology where implanted devices deliver targeted electrical stimulation to the spinal cord. It can help manage severe chronic pain, improve motor function, and in some cases, restore certain autonomic functions for paralyzed individuals. Congress is basically trying to drag the VA's treatment protocols to the cutting edge of neurological science.
And to ensure this kind of advancement happens system-wide, S. 1383 establishes a dedicated 15-member advisory committee whose sole mandate is to constantly assess and demand equal access for veterans with disabilities across all VA facilities, preventing localized disparities in care.
Right, because geography shouldn't dictate the quality of your care.
But they are also dealing with the financial side of access, right? Because medical technology doesn't matter if the veteran can't afford to live or can't physically get to the hospital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
H.R. 8552 addresses the financial reality by ensuring that veteran compensation and dependency and indemnity compensation automatically receive cost of living adjustments, COLAs, that perfectly match the percentage increases given to Social Security recipients. It removes the need for Congress to manually authorize the adjustment every year, tying it permanently to inflation metrics.
And what about physical access for veterans who don't live near a major stateside hospital?
That is addressed in H.R. 9316, which expands eligibility for travel allowances for disabled veterans living in remote territories and freely associated states, such as Micronesia or the Marshall Islands.
A veteran living in Micronesia might have to fly thousands of miles just to get an MRI.
Precisely. The bill addresses the reality of medical deserts. If the government is going to deploy citizens from these territories into combat, the government must cover the logistical cost of treating their injuries when they return home, regardless of how remote that home is.
So, synthesizing all of this, the committee pipeline is pushing for real-time crisis data, emergency agility during disasters, advanced medical technology like neuromodulation, and basic financial and geographic parity. That is a massive, holistic pipeline of reform for the VA. Let's pivot to the second major deep dive in our committee analysis, which deals with the lifeblood of the government, tax law and IRS enforcement.
Much like the strategy we just saw with the VA, Congress is taking a highly nuanced, dual approach to the Internal Revenue Service. They are simultaneously aggressively expanding the IRS's ability to crack down on sophisticated fraud, while at the exact same time expanding protections for everyday taxpayers who find themselves victimized by circumstances beyond their control.
Let's look at the enforcement side first, because H.R. 7972 really stood out to me when reviewing the sources. It is titled the Taxpayer Workforce Modernization Act.
Right. This bill is an acknowledgement that modern tax evasion is not a guy hiding cash under his mattress. It is a highly complex digital shell game. The bill creates a specialized fellowship program to bring 10 highly qualified elite data scientists directly into the IRS for multi-year terms.
10 data scientists doesn't sound like a massive army.
It's not about volume, it's about capability. Their specific mandate is to target offshore tax evasion and ensure compliance with FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act.
Explain FATCA, because that is a massive piece of global financial architecture that most people have probably never heard of.
Passed in 2010, FATCA essentially forces foreign financial institutions, banks, investment funds, brokers anywhere in the world to report information about financial accounts held by U.S. taxpayers directly to the IRS.
And what if they just say no?
If a Swiss bank or a Cayman Islands hedge fund refuses to comply, the U.S. government imposes a massive 30% withholding tax on all their U.S. source income. It is the financial equivalent of a nuclear threat, designed to strip away the secrecy of offshore banking.
But collecting millions of reports from foreign banks is completely useless if you don't have the processing power to actually read and analyze them.
Exactly. And that is why they are bringing in the data scientists. These experts aren't manually reading tax returns. They are writing code to analyze massive, petabyte-scale metadata flows between foreign shell companies, domestic LLCs, and correspondent banks. They use pattern recognition and machine learning to find anomalies in wire transfers and ownership structures that a human auditor would never spot in a lifetime of searching.
They are hunting for the invisible threads connecting hidden assets, and they are backing up these data scientists with even more algorithmic power in H.R. 9501.
The AI Tax Integrity Act, yes. This bill forces the Treasury to establish an 18-month pilot program deploying artificial intelligence directly into the audit process. The AI will be trained to detect fraudulent returns, flag synthetic identity theft, and identify improperly prepared returns at a speed and scale that is physically impossible for human agents.
Congress is essentially asking the IRS to fight algorithmic financial fraud with algorithmic detection.
That's exactly what it is.
But they are also going after the human element of fraud, specifically the people who prey on everyday citizens just trying to file their 1040s.
Yes, through H.R. 9499, which aggressively targets what the industry calls ghost preparers.
What is a ghost preparer, and how does the scam actually work?
A ghost preparer is an unscrupulous tax preparer who charges a client a fee to do their taxes, but refuses to sign the return as the paid preparer. Legally, any paid preparer must sign the document and include their preparer tax identification number. Ghost preparers skip this step so they remain invisible to the IRS.
So what's the scam?
Once they have the client's information, they often improperly alter the documents, inventing fake dependents, inflating deductions, or claiming false credits to artificially inflate the refund amount. They then skim a massive percentage of that inflated refund as their fee, or sometimes route the entire refund directly into their own bank account.
And when the IRS eventually realizes the return is fraudulent, the ghost preparer is long gone, and the taxpayer is the one on the hook for the penalties and the back taxes.
Precisely. The taxpayer is left holding the bag. H.R. 9499 aggressively applies tax return preparation penalties to any individual who improperly alters a return, closing loopholes and giving the IRS sharper teeth to prosecute these bad actors who exploit vulnerable communities.
So that is the enforcement, hammer data scientists, artificial intelligence, and hunting down ghost preparers. But what about the taxpayer protection shield? You mentioned Congress is recognizing that taxpayers are often collateral damage.
H.R. 9500 is a perfect example of Congress using tax law to mitigate physical disasters. The bill repeals certain limitations on personal casualty losses and provides increased relief for theft losses involving fraud or deceit. But what is truly fascinating is that it specifically extends the limitation period for victims of pyrrhotite-related personal casualty losses.
Pyrrhotite, I had to look this up when I was reading the sources. It sounds like a fictional mineral from a sci-fi movie.
It is very real, and it is devastating. Pyrrhotite is an iron sulfide mineral. If a quarry accidentally mines stone containing pyrrhotite, and that stone is crushed and used as aggregate to mix concrete for home foundations, a slow-moving disaster begins. When pyrrhotite is exposed to water and oxygen, which naturally happens in groundwater around a basement, it undergoes a chemical reaction. It expands, rusts, and slowly crumbles.
Wow.
Over the course of 10 to 15 years, the concrete foundation of the house will literally crack, heave, and turn to dust.
The house essentially collapses out from under the family. And standard homeowners insurance almost never covers it because it's considered a defective material rather than a sudden peril like a fire.
Exactly. Families are left with homes that are structurally condemned and financially worthless, requiring hundreds of thousands of dollars to lift the house and pour a new foundation. H.R. 9500 ensures that these homeowners are not penalized by arbitrary tax deadlines when trying to claim casualty losses for this incredibly specific, localized geological crisis. It bends the tax code to accommodate the physical reality of feeling concrete.
It shows how intricately tax law intersects with everyday life. There is also relief in this pipeline for a much more severe geopolitical kind of crisis in H.R. 9496.
Yes. This bill postpones tax deadlines and waives all late fees and penalties for U.S. nationals who are unlawfully or wrongfully detained or held hostage abroad.
It is a dark, tragic necessity. But it is vital. The idea that a journalist or an aid worker could survive a harrowing, years-long hostage situation in a foreign country, finally secure their freedom, and return home only to be greeted by a mountain of IRS penalties and compounding interest for failing to file their taxes while imprisoned, it's just unconscionable.
The bill ensures that the bureaucracy pauses while the citizen fights for their life. And to help taxpayers fight back against the bureaucracy in general, H.R. 9498 expands the authority of the National Taxpayer Advocate.
Who is the National Taxpayer Advocate?
It is an independent organization within the IRS designed to help taxpayers resolve systemic problems and disputes. This new bill allows the advocate to appear as an amicus curiae, which translates to a friend of the court in federal tax cases. This means that if a taxpayer is suing the IRS, the advocate can officially file briefs providing context, explaining systemic IRS failures, and arguing on behalf of the taxpayer's rights, giving citizens a much stronger institutional voice in the judicial system.
Before we move on from the committee pipeline, I want to briefly touch on something that often gets overlooked. Amidst all these massive systemic overhauls regarding global taxes, artificial intelligence, and foreign policy, Congress is still fundamentally responsible for managing the day-to-day physical geography of the nation.
Yeah, the structural and land management bills are like a constant hum in the background of Congress.
We see bills like H.R. 8454, which literally swaps small parcels of land between Yosemite National Park and the Stanislaus National Forest just to clean up administrative boundaries and make management more efficient. We have H.R. 9415, which redesignates the Ocmulgee Mounds as a national park and officially takes 133 acres of land into trust for the Muskogee Nation.
Taking land into trust is a complex legal mechanism where the federal government holds the title to the land for the beneficial use of a recognized tribe, enhancing tribal sovereignty, protecting cultural sites, and fostering cooperation between the federal government and the nation.
And then there's H.R. 7244, which authorizes a federal feasibility study to evaluate making the 550-mile Bay Area Ridge Trail a designated national scenic trail. It is just a grounding reminder that Congress isn't just debating abstract code and global theory. They literally manage the physical dirt, the forests, and the trails of the country.
It is the ultimate granular responsibility.
So we have seen what passed on the floor. We have analyzed the fierce ideological debates. We have dug deeply into the committee pipeline dealing with veterans, algorithmic tax enforcement, and land management. Now, for the million-dollar question. What does this all mean for the future? If we project these legislative vectors forward, where are we heading?
If we project these trends forward, we are heading into an era defined by massive collisions. Collisions between ideological visions and collisions between digital ambitions and physical realities.
Let's look at the immediate collisions looming on the horizon, like the funding fights. The Rules Committee is currently prepping H.R. 8800, which is the FY27 National Defense Authorization Act, and H.R. 8595, the State Department Appropriations Bill. The State Department numbers are always a highly accurate barometer of how the government perceives the globe.
They are, because budgets reflect priorities, not rhetoric. The bill allocates $9.76 billion total for the State Department. But when you look at how that money is weighted, a stark picture emerges. $4.16 billion is earmarked specifically for worldwide security protection, and another $865 million is dedicated solely to embassy security.
That means more than half of the entire diplomatic budget is purely defensive?
Exactly. It reflects a deeply pessimistic, highly dangerous global posture where diplomatic outposts are no longer just centers of negotiation. They are functioning as hardened fortresses.
And how we staff, direct, and philosophically define those fortresses is also up for massive debate. I want to look at H.R. 9087. This is titled the America First Department of State Bill. I read the summary on this one in the sources, and it looks less like a standard budget adjustment and more like an aggressive, fundamental dismantling of the current diplomatic architecture. Am I misreading the scale of this? Like, what does a bill like this signal about future foreign policy?
You are not misreading the scale at all. Impartially speaking, H.R. 9087 signals a desire by a significant bloc in Congress to completely tear down and rebuild the apparatus of American foreign aid and diplomacy, forcing it to comply with highly specific domestic ideological criteria.
Walk through exactly what this bill would do if passed.
First, the bill gives the Secretary of State the explicit authority to reorganize or outright abolish USAID, the United States Agency for International Development.
Abolish USAID. That agency administers billions of dollars in civilian foreign aid, disaster relief, and development assistance across the globe. What happens to that geopolitical vacuum if they just abolish it?
The proponents of the bill argue that foreign aid is currently wasteful and misaligned with American interests, and that those functions should be absorbed directly into the State Department to ensure strict political oversight. Critics argue it would cede immense soft power and humanitarian influence directly to adversaries like China.
That's a massive debate.
Furthermore, the bill prohibits awarding any grants to non-governmental organizations that do not strictly comply with protecting life rules, or rules combating what the bill specifically terms gender ideology and discriminatory equity ideologies.
So they are tying global financial aid directly to domestic culture war parameters. It also requires an entirely new training curriculum for diplomats, right?
Yes, it mandates that all foreign service officers must complete a standardized training course on America First principles before they can be assigned to a post, essentially ensuring ideological alignment before deployment. But perhaps the most surprising detail is that it even dips into cartography.
Cartography.
Yeah, the bill explicitly prohibits the State Department from procuring or displaying any maps that inaccurately depict the Gulf of America.
The Gulf of America? I have to assume that is a rebranding of the Gulf of Mexico.
The legislative text specifies the prohibition of maps inaccurately depicting the Gulf of America. Regardless of the geographic nomenclature or the historical accuracy of the term, it represents a profound psychological and ideological shift in how the United States presents itself to the world and stakes its claims.
It is a completely different worldview. And it stands in stark contrast to other bills quietly moving through the pipeline, like H.R. 9062, which simply seeks to establish a new director general to build up a cadre of commercial diplomacy specialists whose only job is to help American businesses compete overseas in traditional markets.
Right. You have one vision focused on ideological compliance, cartographic rebranding, and institutional dismantling, and another vision focused on traditional, pragmatic commercial expansion. That is going to be a fascinating, highly volatile collision in the next legislative session.
But perhaps the biggest collision we are going to see in the near future isn't between two political ideologies at all. It's the collision we teased at the very beginning of this deep dive. The unstoppable force of digital ambition meeting the immovable object of physical infrastructure. The AI energy crisis.
This is the defining logistical challenge of the next decade. Look at H.R. 9340 and H.R. 6529. Congress is legally forcing the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, to convene a technical conference within 90 days.
Why the urgency? What is FERC and why is Congress demanding a conference?
FERC is the independent agency that regulates the interstate transmission of electricity, natural gas, and oil. Congress is forcing this conference because large load customers, and the bill specifically, repeatedly call out artificial intelligence data centers, are drawing so much baseload power from the grid that they are threatening to drastically drive up electricity costs for everyday residential ratepayers and potentially destabilize local grids.
We talk about AI, ChatGPT, Midjourney, large language models as this ethereal, cloud-based software. It feels like magic. But the cloud doesn't exist in the sky. The cloud requires massive, hyperdense, physical server farms.
And those servers require astronomical amounts of electricity to run the processors and millions of gallons of water for evaporative cooling systems to prevent those processors from melting down. An AI query can require 10 times the electricity of a standard Google search. The intelligence might be artificial, but the energy consumption is intensely, dangerously real.
Congress is suddenly realizing that you cannot have infinite, unregulated digital expansion without a massive physical toll.
They are desperately trying to figure out rate structures and load balancing protocols to ensure that a tech conglomerate running a trillion-parameter AI model to generate marketing copy doesn't accidentally cause a brownout for a hospital or spike the utility bill of a family living 3 towns away who are just trying to keep their air conditioning running.
It encapsulates everything we have explored today. Congress is trying to modernize the physical grid, regulate the digital tech companies, protect the taxpayer, track global fraud, and somehow balance all these competing, fiercely held ideological visions of what America should be.
Which brings this massive, abstract federal machinery right back down to you, the listener. How does all of this impact your daily life, your local utility bill, your digital privacy, your health care, or your tax return?
It impacts every single facet of it. The decisions being made in those committee rooms and on that floor dictate the physical and digital realities you navigate every day. And that is why civic engagement matters so deeply. First of all, we want to express our profound gratitude to you for taking the time to wade into these deep waters with us today. If you want to help keep this independent, ad-free civic education resource sustainable, please consider using the Buy Me a Coffee link in the episode description. It truly helps pay for the servers that keep our own, much smaller data centers running.
And we highly encourage you to utilize the civic tools at your disposal. Everything we discussed today, from the specific preemption clauses in the KIDS Act, to the algorithmic pilot program in the AI Tax Integrity Act, to the profound historical debates on Lebanon and the 250th anniversary, is part of the public record. You can find, read, and analyze the exact original text of these bills on congress.gov.
Don't just take our word for it. Read the primary sources for yourself. Track the upcoming committee hearings. Keep an eye out for that FERC technical conference on AI data centers because it is going to be incredibly consequential. Contact your representatives to share your thoughts on these issues. Tell them whether you support funding for your local municipal grid or how you feel about the VA's modernization efforts. Participate in democracy beyond just casting a ballot every 2 years. Attend your local utility board meetings. Submit public comments to federal agencies.
The machine of democracy only works and only serves the people if the public remains actively engaged with the process of its maintenance.
I couldn't agree more. Now, before we sign off, we always like to leave you with a final, lingering question. Something provocative to mull over on your own that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
We saw today that Congress wants to launch an 18-month pilot program using artificial intelligence to catch complex tax fraud. But we also saw, on that exact same day, that Congress is terrified of AI data centers drawing so much physical power that they crash the energy grid or bankrupt residential ratepayers.
The ultimate dual nature of the technology. It is both the solution and the crisis.
So here is the question to take with you. If artificial intelligence soon becomes the primary tool for both committing civic fraud and detecting it, while simultaneously dictating the physical limits of our national infrastructure and energy grid, are we rapidly entering an era where algorithms govern the realities of our civic duties more than the actual laws written by the humans we elect?
Wow. Are the algorithms the new lawmakers? That is a heavy, fascinating thought to take with you, but that is exactly why we do this. Remember, the machine might be loud, the gears might grind, and the blueprints might be contradictory, but it is our machine. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep looking for the context. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.